friends, welcome to the lecture Hindi Cinema and Religious Tourism Part 3. In the earlier two lectures on Hindi Cinema and Religious Tourism, we talked about the various aspects of the religious tourism and how over a period of time we have seen that Hindi cinema has also contributed to the religious tourism, and in the recent times as well we have seen that so many films they have been shot on different religious locations, the places which are considered to be the pilgrimage places, and how over a period of time we have seen the number of visitors, maybe Indian as well as foreigners, those who have visited these places because of watching them on screen in the framework of cinema, OTT and other kinds of platform. And we discussed some of the movies earlier, that how these kinds of films which were made on in these particular cities, maybe Banaras for that matter, or various religious places in other parts of the country, and we find that definitely cinema has in that particular framework has contributed to the religious tourism. And when we see that more and more people they visit these areas, then it also gives some kind of a boost to tourism as well. This can be seen in the framework of Shirdi Ke Sai Baba, where we find that a number of films which were made on Shirdi Ke Sai Baba, and how over a period of time Shirdi Ke Sai Baba became so popular, and Shirdi as a destination, also the number of visitors, those who were visiting Shirdi, they also grew exponentially, and this further in a way also helped to build the infrastructure of that particular place. So we find that how today we will talk about various other kinds of programs on screen, like on television programs, and how when they are being shown on in the framework of the religious places, and how the new era of pilgrimage, by connecting them with the faith of people, that has also been happening. So it also in a way reflects the power of cinema, and how audience is also able to connect with the sacred geography and inspires the religious tourism, as I said, and how sacred geography is also very important, that how some of the regions they are preserved because they are considered to be sacred. Sacred groves are one of the examples in that context, that how people they try to preserve those regions, and some kind of religious significance is also attached to some of these regions in the context of the sacred groves, as I told you that some of the forest areas where we find, and it is from also important from the framework of the environment as well. And in the recent times, in the framework of religious tourism, we find that the construction of Ram temple in Ayodhya, which has become a major center of religious tourism, where we find an unprecedented increase in the number of devotees, and how over a period of time since last year we find that it has surpassed Taj Mahal to become the top tourist attraction in Uttar Pradesh. So it is one of the places where we find that tourists they have reached in large numbers, and we see that if we want to see any kind of a data which has been given, then we find that after the construction of Ram temple, there a huge number of devotees they have visited there. And when you tend to understand it in the framework of the numbers, then we have this kind of a data, available tourism data, where how we see that total of 60 lakh 22,618 tourists they visited the district in 2020, and then we find that 16 crore 44 lakhs 19,522 in 2024. So we find that when we talk about this particular district, then so many people they visited this district, and then Ayodhya itself received 3,153 international and 13.55 crore domestic tourists between January and September 2024. So this kind of a trend, where we find that more and more tourists they are visiting a particular place because of the religious significance, the kind of spiritual ideas which are attached to that particular space has also grown. and films not only from this particular period but in earlier period as well, that many of the films they have promoted this kind of tourism. And we find that in recent times, when you tend to compare the data, there is around 70% increase in the religious tourism, and it was also attributed to the grand Pran Pratishtha ceremony held at the Ram Mandir in 2024. Apart from that, we also see that the other places like Mathura and Vrindavan, where we find that both these places are popular for Lord Krishna's Leela, and they have a lot of religious, cultural and spiritual significance as well, because they are considered to be centers of spirituality and culture, and in from centuries. And we find that when cinema or films which are made in Mathura and Vrindavan, and which are talking about these particular places, then people definitely get influenced by and then they want to visit these places, and that is how we see that the numbers of tourists over a period of time has increased exponentially. And we find that Hindi films and serials, they have portrayed the unique identity of these places at the national, at the international level. And many of the serials which are based, and the films which are based on childhood pastimes of Lord Krishna and the devotional traditions in the films, they have established the cultural image of Mathura and Vrindavan in the minds of people. And when we tend to understand that in a framework where a number of films like Hare Rama, Hare Krishna in 1971, which was directed by Devanand, and Shri Krishna Leela in 1971 by Homi Wadia, Meera again directed by Gulzar in 1979, and Shri Krishna in 1993 to 97, Doordarshan directed by Ramanand Sagar, and Jai Shri Krishna again in 2008 2009. So we find that these kinds of TV series, these kinds of serials, they have also played an important role in terms of disseminating information about these places. And apart from that, we also see that a number of animation films which are based on Ganesh, Krishna, etc. They have also been made, and these animation films which are based on Ganesh, Krishna, Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc., all of them, they are not only providing information about these texts, but at the same time we find that how when these kinds of images they are being shown to the young children, they also come to know about the culture of the particular places, and over a period of time they are there in their minds, because when they learn them at a tender age, then they may also are able to relate with these kinds of stories. And when they are watching these kinds of places, they are hearing about these places, and in the later times further information is being provided to them in this regard, then we find that they also visit such kind of places as well. And when we talk about these places, apart from feature films and television serials where these places they are being talked about and they are being conveyed, there are other documentary films as well which are based on Mathura and Vrindavan, the land of Krishna by ISKCON Cinema, and Mathura, the city of Lord Krishna by Discovery Channel, Shri Bake Bihari Temple, Shri Radha Vallabhji Temple, and Incarnation of Unborn director Atharv Singh, the vagabond films, have brought the real images of these sites to a wider audience. So we find that apart from the feature films, apart from the television series which are shown on television, we find that the other kinds of avenues in the framework of the documentary films which are specifically talking about these particular areas or particular temples in that region. And we find that when such kind of cinema, when such kind of documentaries they are being exhibited to an audience, then the audience definitely feels to visit these places as well, because of the religious and the spiritual significance which is attached to these places. And we find that when in a way shootings are also happening in these places, for example, and we find that when these shootings they are being held, then they also strengthen the visual identity of these particular places, and people they in a way feel that they should go and visit these places to see the visual splendor of these places. And we find that when people get inspired, when they have this kind of a religious and spiritual ideas, and how devotees they when they reach there, the numbers they also increase, and religious tourism takes a new kind of a momentum and direction. And we see that when you talk about the various kinds of regions, for example, Brajmandal region includes Vrindavan, Banaras, Govardhan and Mathura, and how it has become a major tourist as well as shooting destination for Hindi cinema. And another reason for this is the film shooting incentive schemes announced by the government of Uttar Pradesh. So we find that how the government is also in a way providing some kind of incentives to the filmmakers, that when a particular percentage of film is being shot in a particular district or a state, and then we find that incentives to the filmmakers they are being provided by the state, because the tourism is also and this is being done because the tourism also increases when these kinds of images dealing with that particular city they are being shown on the screen. Then we find that how the audience they come to know about these particular places, and then they also tend to visit these places. So that is another area where we find that government incentive schemes they have also helped in terms of promoting the not only the culture of that particular region, but at the same time the tourism potential of that particular region has also increased when these kinds of images they are being shown on the screen. And we find that the role of government, as I told you, in terms of providing the subsidies, incentives, etc., is also there, and how the facilities to the filmmakers they are also being provided, and how it also helps in a way in terms of developing the local infrastructure of that region, because we find that people from other regions, when they are going to visit these places, then definitely you need hotels, restaurants of a particular standard for the visiting tourists. And then we find that so many people, those who are into these industries, those who are into such kind of a business, they establish the hotels and restaurants and other kinds of businesses are also established in these regions, and people they also get employment when they are being employed in these kinds of activities. So we find that when such kind of incentives they are being given, that a new kind of a dimension is being provided to the local economy, and the local people they are getting a lot of employment, and because of which we find the standard of living of people of that particular region it also increases, apart from the development in the infrastructure which also takes place. And we also see, because of all these things, again some kind of a development of the tourism sector also takes place. And over a period of time we have seen that how some of the regions they have developed as major centers of religious tourism, and Mathura Vrindavan is again one of the major centers in this context. And some kind of data which have been given are in the framework that how on normal days more than 1 lakh devotees visit these places, and on weekends 2 to 2.5 lakhs, and 5 to 6 lakh devotees on festivals like Janmashtami. So we find that how people, those who are, or the devotees, those who are visiting these places, they are giving some kind of a thrust to the tourism industry. And we find that how the tourism department is also responsible in the framework of providing the facilities to the visiting tourists, and in terms of framing the guidelines that the smooth kind of tourism sector is there. And the Ministry of Tourism or the Department of Tourism in UP they have in a way conveyed that nearly 6 crore tourists they visited Mathura Vrindavan in the year 2022-23, which is the second highest figure in North India after Banaras. So we find that how, apart from Banaras, which is considered to be the holy city, how so many foreign and Indian tourists they visited Banaras, Mathura, Vrindavan is again has developed over a period of time as a city where more and more people are visiting these regions. And one of the statements given by the Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath with regard to Mathura, he said that how over a period of time where Goa used to be attract the most tourists in the country, but in 2022 80 lakh tourists came there, while 7 crore devotees reached Kashi and 6 crore devotees reached the Braj region. So we find that how over a period of time people they are visiting these regions, and he made some kind of a comparison with regard to Goa, which was seen to be a tourist destination. And so this in a way provides some kind of statement with regard to the inclination towards the religious tourism. And we see that how films definitely they have contributed in this sense. And as I talked about Shirdi and Shirdi Ke Sai Baba, which was released only 2 years after the success of Jai Santoshi Ma in 1975, and in our earlier lecture we talked about Jai Santoshi Ma and the impact which Jai Santoshi Ma created in terms of the number of devotees which increased exponentially, and how we find that various temples of Jai Santoshi Ma they were created, and people they kept fast also, and so some kind of a cult around Jai Santoshi Ma was created. And we find that Shirdi Ke Sai Baba, which was made in 1977, tried to capitalize on the growing enthusiasm for religious films. And we find that this film over a period of time was also able to influence masses, and it was in a way designed to appeal to two kinds of audiences. The main focus was on the Hindi speaking masses as reflected in the titles in the Devanagari script and the absence of English in the dialogues. And the movie primarily targeted the general public, but its story and presentation were also related to the educated urban class. So we find that the way film was made, the way subtitling was being done, so it was being targeted at a particular audience, and we find that how the educated urban class was also targeted in this particular film. And when we see the backdrop of this particular film, we find that class of the urban middle class urban family is being shown, where a doctor is questioning the utility and relevance of saints in the scientific age. So we find that film also raised questions, but at the same time we find that not only particular this film, but there were so many other films and TV series which were made on Shirdi Ke Sai Baba. And over a period of time, if we compare the number of tourists which were visiting in 1970s and the number of tourists those who are visiting Shirdi now, so there is a great number which has increased over a period of time. And when you talk about this particular film, which was not a blockbuster initially, but we find that it was able to attract enough audience attraction in that sense, and how it was also shown on television in the later times. And this film definitely helped in the framework where how the cult of Shirdi Ke Sai Baba also grew over a period of time. And when this particular film was released, we find that the fame of Sai Baba was largely confined to Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Andhra, but this film helped him gain wider national recognition. And we find that because of this kind of a recognition, we find that Sai Baba temples, they were also made in different parts of India. It was no longer restricted to Maharashtra in Shirdi only, and we find that how this particular film also helped in that sense for the popularity of Shirdi Ke Sai Baba. And when you talk about the commercial aspect of this film, though it was not a success in that context, and it failed to appear in the list of the top 10 highest grossing Hindi films of 1977. And we find when you talk about the box office earnings of this particular film, the film was the 31st most watched Hindi film of that year, officially declaring it a flop, as was the case with most religious films in the 1970s. But we find that though these films may not be successful in that particular framework in terms of box office earnings, but definitely they created a lot of impact, and not all of them were successful, but it was the case with all other films as well, that if we see the various genres of the films, not every film from every genre was successful, only a few of them they were successful. So that was the case in 1970s as well, when we talk about Gopal Krishna, when we talk about Jai Santoshi Ma, there were several films which became very popular, and some of them they were not successful commercially as well. And we find that how Shirdi over a period of time attained some kind of a national identity with this kind of film, and how Shirdi became popular as well. So when we tend to talk about this particular area, how it was a village which was which had only just 200 houses at the beginning of the century, but over a period of time we find that it became one of the major pilgrimage places in India, and now so many people they go to Shirdi for the darshan of Sai Baba. And we find that how when you see the figures over a period of time, by 2010 the number of devotees visiting Shirdi had exceeded 60 lakhs. And when we find that the film reached a wider audience, when it began to be broadcast on television, and thereafter other films which were made on Sai Baba and television series which were made on Sai Baba, they were released and they were being broadcast on television as well. Then we find that the number of tourists or the religious tourists, those who are visiting these places, they increased. And we find that Doordarshan, the Indian government television network, started its operation in 1959, but it had some kind of a limited access to the average Indian household until the mid 1980s, and television's reach grew rapidly in mid 1980s and early 1990s, when the number of transmitters across the country increased from just 26 in 1982 to 523 by 1991. So we find that how technology was also in a way developing, the number of transmitters they also increased, and the victory of India in 1983 in the Cricket World Cup, where we find that the demand for color television increased during that time. The coming of two mega serials like Ramayana and Mahabharata on Indian television, where people they were glued to television for that particular period when these series they were being telecast on Sundays, and streets were literally empty during that time because people were not there on the streets. So they had such kind of a popularity during that period. And we also find that it was also a period when Doordarshan began broadcasting a Hindi film every week. And the films they were also being broadcast during the election period. We find that when elections were having, in the result of the elections, they were being discussed, when they were being communicated to the audience. And that point of time we find that these kinds of films they were also shown. And we find when in 1988 the first national telecast of Sai Baba of Shirdi took place, bringing the film to a new level of popularity at that point of time, and the local community following the film's broadcast honored one of the film's lead actors who had contributed to popularizing Shirdi and Sai Baba. So we find that these kinds of films which were made and which were being shown on television, and how in 1990s, mid 80s and 90s we find that the popularity of television also increased, and when these kinds of broadcasts they were taking place in the framework of the religious films which were propagating or talking about the religious tourism in that sense. And we find that more and more people they went to such religious places to watch these areas and the various kinds of monuments, the temples, etc., which were there in these regions. So we will continue further with our idea of religious tourism in our next lecture. Thank you very much.